Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Transition Bridge podcast. This is Debbie, your host, and this is the podcast where we come together each and every week to discover more about the purpose and the power of life's transitions. Today's episode is sponsored by Amy Throw, leading consultant and image coach with Cabby, a unique women's collection that is effortless, thoughtfully designed, and helps women move confidently through every season of life. Amy works one on one with women to create style that reconnects them to who they are and who they're becoming. And I've been a fan for years. And if you're watching my YouTube channel, you could see the beauty of the collection. You can connect with Amy and browse the collection with the link found in the show notes. So now let's move into today's episode. And I want to ask you a question. What comes to mind when I say to you the word creativity? When we hear the word creativity, most of us picture paintbrushes, stages, something artistic, right? But creativity also is more fundamental than that. Creativity is the ability to see differently, and creativity always believes there's an answer. When we're overwhelmed or burned out, our world will get small, and the way we think begins to tighten. We start believing there's only one solution, one outcome, one story, and that narrowing is exhausting. So, to help us learn and understand more about the powerful creative, I'm sorry, I'm going to say that again. So, editors, you can take that out. To learn and understand more about how powerful creative thinking can be, I have invited Dr. Andre Walton to be my guest today. He is a social psychologist, best-selling author, TEDx and keynote speaker, and a certified accredited coach. And through his own personal experience in a time where he had to make difficult decisions under extreme stress, he realized he was thinking wrong. And this was the crucial discovery that led him on a 20-year path to researching creativity and creative thinking and to discover and scientifically show how powerful creative thinking can be. Well, Dr. Andre Walton, welcome to the Transition Bridge podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show, Debbie. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you are so welcome. Well, I was really intrigued when I read about you and creativity, and I think it's something so important in life and also in seasons of transition when we have to make decisions. We can sometimes get stuck and not be able to see beyond the circumstance or the obstacle. And creativity, I believe, takes us around that or over that. So, I'm excited to have you here today with your experience and your wisdom and knowledge on creativity.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So, as I just read, you were in a season yourself where you probably discovered you were not thinking creatively. You were in a situation under stress, trying to make a lot of decisions. And it was in that time you discovered you were thinking wrong. So, can you tell us more about that?
Yes, absolutely. I'm in my 20s. I became an inventor. I just started to. I invented a microphone that was subsequently used by Frank Sinatra and Elton John and a
Wow.
number of other known entities and venues, and also a range of equipment that made ultrasound imaging much safer. That was became the world standard actually for measuring ultrasound. So um, I was not successful in trying to get people to license in either of those. Britain was in a state of recession at that time, and everybody was focused on their core issues of their business. And so I basically cleaned off the kitchen table and started a company to manufacture and then market these items. And winding the clock forward sort of 12 years, I moved to the States to create a subsidiary business so that I can
Mhm.
better address the American market. And towards the end of that time, a number of things came together. I was at a trade show in Chicago. It was just about to open, and I was fiddling around making sure we got the right bits and pieces in place. And my phone rang twice. The first time it was my a weeping mother from a hospital in England, and my stepfather had died. And then the second call, which was probably an hour later, was my secretary in Florida telling me that my general manager hadn't been in the office for 2 days and she hadn't managed to reach him. And it transpired that I'd forgotten he was an alcoholic, but he had fallen off the wagon and it was back to rehab. So that was the very first stop on a round the world trade show trip. From Chicago to London to Frankfurt to Tokyo to LA, and then back to the office. And it was everything kind of resolved itself as these things do. Nobody really noticed the difference, but that was the beginning of the slope into burnout for me. It was just, I had been pushing myself hard. I was under a lot of stress. And I think stress is interesting because we automatically think of it as a negative when somebody says stress. But in reality, there's a fine razor blade line between stress, the negative, and excitement. And my entrepreneurial days were really very exciting. I mean, they were very pressured, but that was a positive thing. I enjoyed all of that. But just crossing that razor blade edge from excitement to the negative side of stress, which swiftly led to burnout, was really devastating for me. And in reality, it was the beginning of my decision to sell my businesses.
Oh, gosh,
It
you went
was
through a lot.
Yeah, it was really a devastating experience. And so when I did sell my businesses, I consulted for a while, helping people set up European companies set up here in the States. And then I decided to go back to school and I got a PhD in social psychology. And my focus was organizational level creativity. And I started to realize that what I had been through in terms of burnout was, in many ways, the product of the fact that I had lost that, as you mentioned, childhood ability to think creatively. And that really kind of mushroomed into a much bigger conversation. And one of the first side of that conversation is how much we really misunderstand creativity.
Yes.
And you did a wonderful introduction there, which really it explains a lot of that those issues. I mean, we sort of think of creativity in a really a rather trivial way. It's an option. It's one of those things, perhaps Aunt Dottie did this when she bought a paint box when retired, or people talk about the products of creativity. But the reality is that creativity is a core human drive. We don't have the jet engine and the internet and the iPhone because we've got opposable thumbs. We have them because we have spent, tens of thousands of years using our curiosity and our innate creativity to better ourselves and our tribe, from the spear and the bow and arrow and the wheel right up to what we have now. And so when any core human drive is not utilized, there are repercussions, negative repercussions. Our core human drive to be connected to others is an
Right,
example. If you
right.
put somebody in solitary confinement,
Hmm.
they will not survive intact mentally under most circumstances. It's a brutal thing to do, and so when we deprive ourselves of the ability to think creatively, a number of negative things happen, and you start to add a few more things into the mix. One of those is a really well-established social psychological process, which when we're under stress, we undergo something called seizing and freezing. And
Okay.
we basically seize the first option that we find to get out of to solve a problem, and we freeze our examination of any other options. So suddenly our decision-making process is down to making a choice of one out of a possibility of one. So
Wow.
very, very suboptimal. And you can see this when you're coaching. If you're coaching people under stress and especially burnout, you see this kind of tunnel vision, and people. Your first sort of challenge is to try and get people out of just discussing their burnout, their stress, and all the negativity that has brought them to the pain that they're feeling. I call it the hamster wheel effect. I mean, it's just people feel trapped in this mental
Right.
process. And what's really happening there is that the way that we look at the world today in this highly complicated, highly tech oriented way is that we tend to use very analytical, deductive thinking processes. We're always weighing out sort of pros and cons, and we're looking at things. We talk about drilling down and focusing in, and this is all very convergent. This is like looking at our world through a microscope. And when we get stressed, that microscope becomes high magnification microscope. It's like a racehorse with blinders on. We can see one direction and we can't see anything around the edges. And creativity is quite the opposite. You mentioned that as children, we have creative thinking. And actually we have to, because as adults, when we're thinking to solve a problem, our subconscious scampers off to its memory banks to see if we've ever come across a similar situation before. And
Mm-hmm.
inevitably, we have as adults, we've heard about something, we've read about something, we've experienced something that's similar to the challenge we've got now. Whatever it is, whether we're walking through the grocery store or thinking about moving house. And so we use that previous situation as a template for what goes on now. And we don't realize we're doing it necessarily, but that's how we work. And it's incredibly effective at saving time and also energy. But kids don't have that option because they don't have the history. They have no history. So they've got to make it up. So, my granddaughters that I saw a lot of since the day they were born, I mean, they would find sort of any object and they bring it to you and they would be, you could see them trying to make sense of how this fitted into their world. And they would sometimes get it very wrong. And that could be could be hilarious. And
It's
so
true.
this is the way. And what we don't necessarily realize is if we use that technique all the time as adults, it's actually using as much energy as going for a stroll. I mean, physical calories burnt type of energy. People don't really realize that, but it's not surprising that, kids, when they fall asleep, I mean, it's like somebody's just taken the batteries out, isn't it? I mean, it's like, they will sleep through anything, being taken out of the back seat of the car, accidentally knock their head against the door frame as you walk in, take them up the stairs, put them on, and they're still like sort of dead to the world. And, not really surprising if that's the way they have to think all the time.
That's
So, that process is creative thinking. The important thing is it's inherently divergent because they have to look at their whole world in order to see where this new little item fits. And the equivalent when we're adults would be if we go to a country that is totally different to the one we live in. I've lived and worked in 7 different countries, from across the whole spectrum of religions, for instance.
mm-hmm.
But if you go to a different country, firstly your all your kind of the hair on the back of your neck's up a little bit. Your everything has the possibility of creating a little bit of fear
Yes,
because
uncomfortable.
exactly. I mean, you're out of your comfort zone, literally. But in order to cope with that, you're looking at everything. I mean, you just, when I first went with my wife to India, I don't think there was a day went past without my thinking, wow, that's an interesting way of doing that, but it certainly seems to work. It's your view of the world has to be very broad. You're just looking at everything, listening at everything, smelling things, tasting things.
Mhm.
Everything is new. So that's the adult equivalent of being a 3-year-old. And
I
so,
love that. Well, let me
yeah,
ask you, Dr. Walton, what is the difference between curiosity and creativity, or are they the same? And should we as adults be challenging ourselves more? Because, just listening to you, when we're put in a situation in a different culture, a different country, we don't, know the ropes. We have to figure it out. So we really have to think into the situation and be aware. um, so again, like what is the difference between curiosity, creativity, and how can we as adults challenge ourselves more?
well, to answer the first part of your question first, I think there are sort of three steps related to creativity. And the first step is curiosity. I mean, that's the initial process. And
Okay.
and that's the process that sparks creative thinking. Because creative thinking is not doesn't necessarily lead to a piece of sculpture or a piece of artwork. I mean, it is just simply the way we're looking at the world. And then, so the curiosity leads to that creative process, that creative thinking process. And that creative thinking process may lead to innovation. Not
Okay.
necessarily, but that's the chain. So, the last stage, the innovation is the actualization of something as a function of that creative thinking. And the creative thinking is the activation of curiosity. If you thought you were going to be curious and you managed to quash that, then the creative thinking wouldn't happen.
I'm so grateful that you explained that because as I'm listening to you, I can absolutely see the connection. You have to be curious before you can create. And so maybe that's what we need to start developing in our lives again, more curiosity. Because as children, as you shared, they're so curious. They want to know, why is the bus yellow? Why is this? They ask the question, why? And I think sometimes as adults, we just fall back to habits, fear-based thinking. We just forget about being curious.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And the interesting thing is, at least to nerds like me, the interesting thing is that these are different neural pathways. I
Yes,
mean,
let's talk about that.
with fMRI imaging, we now have the capacity to see what's lighting up in the brain when that person is thinking in real time. So if you ask somebody to think about something analytical, just try and see, just have a think about what do you think your tax return is going to look like this year? Something intensely tedious, but nonetheless, it forces somebody to be thinking, analytically, deductively, mathematically. And then if you then ask them to think about something that will be related to creativity, there are different neural pathways. So, and interestingly, the creativity neural pathways are nearly always the same kind of neural pathways that are used when we think of something with emotional intelligence.
Okay.
And that's a pretty powerful concept because emotional intelligence, you're really talking about empathy. You're talking about being able to step back and see the big picture. And so its relationship to creativity is, more you think about it, the more sense that it makes, in practice, in what we actually see. But the fact that it's different neural pathways is kind of important because if you want to bring creative thinking back into your life, you don't really change little bits about how you actually think right now. What you do is you introduce different things, and it's all about mixing things up a bit. And it's I think of it like a sort of snow globe. You give it a little bit of a shake, and everything kind of the patterns change. So even making small changes in your life. If you like to go to a particular restaurant, well, maybe you should choose something different from the menu next time you go. We tend to often choose the same thing. Choose a different route to work. You might find, oh, there's a park there. I never realized that was there. Perhaps I'll take the kids there for the weekend. There's all sorts of things that crop up. If you're going on vacation, then get with the family and make a dream board about the place that you're going to. Doesn't have to be, Costa Rica or something. It could just, it could be wherever you choose. You camping at some particular lake or whatever. Or take some, get some pictures, get some old photographs, get some pictures of the kind of fish they have in the lake. All sorts of different things. So, because visual stimuli really helps you to create those new neural pathways. So and I think the most important thing is if you're making a decision at work or at home, kind of stop yourself and say, okay, that's the decision that's the option I've just identified, and make yourself think up three more options, three more ways that you might be able to achieve that challenge, meet that challenge. And all these things create the neural pathways that start to improve your creative thinking. And I think the end result of that is that we then have a balance where we can think creatively or we can think analytically because we need both. And as a jazz musician, I look at that as if I'm playing jazz with my group. And there are parts when we just play the song, and we play the song skillfully, in tune, in the same meter. And then comes the point when we go into our own individual improvisation. And that's the part where you're switching from the analytical, we don't happen to play with music, but if there were music there, you'd be following the dots. And then you go into the improvisation part of it. And that is where you get into, what's sometimes called the flow of
Yes.
creativity. And you start to, so you need those two. Even if you're, let's say, a sculptor and you're wanting to create a particular image, and you're thinking, yes, okay, well, I can. You don't just get out the chisel and any old bit of rock and start doing it. You start to think to yourself, no, there's actually, I need some quite fine work here, so I can't use that particular marble because I know it chips too easily, and I'm not going to get the shapes that I want. So, you'll choose your precise medium. If you're an oil painter, you're off into the hills to paint things. You'll have to decide exactly what size canvases you want. You have to, and all this is the analytical part of your mind. And
Yes.
it's the same really with anything that you're doing. And so we need both of those things.
I can
But
see where the analytical makes space for the creative to come forth. Because if we're bogged down with what we need to do or what we need to bring, if we don't think it through, I think it does. It shuts down our creativity. And I love what you were saying about, the musicians. That's one of my favorite parts when I'm watching a group play, a band, and I see one of the musicians have their solo. And I know they're hearing something different and they're being creative in the way that they're playing in between the song itself, what we know of the song, but they're playing something in between that is so beautiful, but the creativity brings that about. I just think that's fascinating. And I know, Dr. Walton, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs and health workers, and you do really try to help them with the burnout. So let me ask you this. How does creative thinking interrupt stress patterns that almost feel automatic in us?
well, if you have somebody that has extreme grief or trauma or
Mhm.
anxiety or burnout, um, it's tempting as a coach to try and sort of nudge that person into changing their view of the world in subtle little shifts. But in my experience, that's not very effective. Um, what is introducing creative thinking into their processes, however, and introducing those new neural pathways can be very effective. And as an example, one of my clients, he had really been in a state of quite extreme grief for about 18 months. His very good friend and mentor had tragically committed suicide.
Oh, that's
And
sad.
he was still, he at his work, everything was more stressful, and he was really on the verge of burnout as well as this grief trauma. And he was, his friends at work had really tried to be supportive, but they had been gradually sort of trying to not to get on his team because he was such a downer. I mean, it was
Oh,
just the whole mood, spread to everybody. And so, in our third session, I was seeing this pattern where the first few minutes, first however long you gave him, really, he's talking about his how grief-ridden he's been this week, the pain that he suffered this week, what he's been
mhm.
thinking about this week. So I switched tack, and he early on he told me that he used to be very keen on videography. And
Okay.
so I just, out of the blue, I just said, tell me a little bit about, your videography. What kinds of things did you do, and so on and so forth. And his mood sort of lightened up quite a bit. I think this took him back to a little bit of an earlier time, and he was describing this kind of thing. So I gave him a couple of tasks to do, homework to do between two sessions, and one of them was to go to a local museum. He'd got a modern art museum not far from him, and to just either photograph something that particularly interested him or write about it or something like that. And the second task was find something you can do with your, dust off the camera, get it off the top shelf again, and just make me a little video about something that's interesting to you. And so, okay, that was it. Well, the next time we started off, with the grief of the week. And I said, okay, let's have a look at some of the things you did for your homework. And it transpired that he was an extremely talented person with a pencil. I mean, a drawer, an artist with a pencil and charcoal, and he'd done just an incredibly good picture of a piece of sculpture that had really taken his attention. And then when I asked him what got on with the video, he put the memory card into his laptop and showed me this video, and it was about a friend of his who did a track meet that following weekend and had actually taken second place, and he'd videoed the whole thing.
Oh, great.
And he was going to give it to his friend, whose birthday was in like 2 weeks' time or something. And his whole personality changed when he was telling me about all this stuff. The actual statue that he'd sketched was quite a morbid topic. I mean, this was sort of a First World War soldier, but he didn't say it in a morbid sort of way. I mean, he was just describing how he'd gone about making this picture. And then, when he got to the videography, it was just so upbeat. I mean, it was getting more and more upbeat as the session went. I'd never seen him like this before. So, we talked about that for a little while, and then, I encouraged him to go to. He was quite a good guitarist. So I said, find yourself an open mic night. It was quite an arty sort of place he lived, and if it's not an open mic, then just live music.
Mhm.
And so, because one of the things that goes on with people under stress or burnout is they tend to sever the links with their friends and their family. And I noticed that about him too. He was really he just didn't want to have anything to do with other people. So that's really why I wanted him to go to somewhere where there was a live event of that. Well, to cut the story short, it was just quite incredible. I mean, another 2 or 3 sessions, and he was really bouncing back. And within sort of something like maybe 6 weeks, he was really back on his feet again. And I told him, we're not going to we don't want the goal here to be that you never think about your friend and mentor again.
Of course.
Our goal is we want you, when you see a picture of your friend and mentor, our goal is that you want to think of that with love and affection. And that's what we were gradually doing. He would have a picture in his pocket of some time when they had a fun time together, and he would take that out and have a look at it. And when he was thinking of his friend, as opposed to bursting into tears or feeling the pain of his loss. And that process of introducing creative thinking was so powerful
Yeah.
that I started to really think about it and work it into, and I've now created three programs, Banish Burnout programs, that use that as the central point. But I think tying it into the science of the process is firstly you're creating a new neural pathway. I mean, it's new in the sense that it wasn't there weeks ago. I mean, it's not new in the sense he's never experienced that. It's one of the powerful things about creativity is that we've all experienced it. We're
Yes.
2, 3, 4, 5 years old. So reawakening that is actually relatively easy because we've got that memory tucked away somewhere that this is a good thing. And so, that's one powerful thing that you're creating this new neural pathway. And then people, if they feel they're, in his case, if he felt himself sliding back into grief, then we had various little processes built into the technique where we just get him to switch back to the other pathway until he feels comfortable going back into his memories of that process. So, I see it a little bit as if you've got a sort of convex lens, of stress where you're really focused in, and you're
Hmm.
putting a concave lens in front of it to balance out the view, to stop it being this way and getting it to be this way. And because one of the things that happens then is that you're beginning to see options. All the time your
Yes.
stress is focusing in, you can't see the big picture. And sadly, people with severe burnout can easily end up as into suicide
Mm.
because there is no future in their view. They can't see the future because of
Yes.
this convergent thinking. So you get creativity in there and its inherent divergent characteristic, and you can suddenly see the future. Okay, this is a temporary thing, it's going on now, it's going to be over. There is a future, and I can see some of the things I can do in the future. It's just such a powerful process, and the more I learn and the more I sort of think about it and coach people, the more little details start to add up to support that kind of image of what's going on.
Oh, it's such a powerful story. And I'm just thinking how much creativity helps our mental health,
Yes,
our emotional pain. And I'm sure creativity gives us energy.
yes. It absolutely does. And one of the things that's been established in social science for a long time, research by myself 20 years ago and others kind of confirmed a lot of this, is that when you're doing something creative, that correlates with increased happiness. I mean,
Yes.
you can scientifically measure it in most people. I mean, there are extremes where people are perhaps not, have a slightly different mental metabolism, but it's so that's part of a very positive part of the process. But I think you're right there. I really believe that you need this balance.
Yes.
And if we were to talk more about transitions, then you can see, I think, that if you're in a state, if you're in a transition, firstly, you're quite likely to be under some stress.
Hmm.
But even if you're not, if you're in a transition, it's so critical that you can see the options ahead of you
Yes.
more than at any other time. If it's all plain sailing and nothing's changing very much, then you may not notice that need so much. But if you're in a transition and you can't see the options, that can be increase the stress you're under so much dramatically.
I'm glad that you shared that because I believe transitions, one of the purposes of them is to help us grow, help us to expand.
Yeah.
It's an internal transition as well as just changing physical locations, but internally we transition, we grow, we learn more. And that takes courage and it takes letting go of the fear of the things that we can't let go of so we can embrace the new. And I love how you brought creativity into it because creativity will expand the vision that's ahead. And what maybe we were afraid of now has a little bit of joy attached to it. And I could see why creativity is so important.
Absolutely, and I think according to the Chinese calendar, we have just left the year of the snake
Yes.
with sloughing off our dead skin
Hmm.
to be galloping forward into the year of the horse. And so, it's that process of sloughing off your the old skin is an interesting kind of analog, isn't it, to the
Yes.
idea that progressing, we're growing, and if you're growing, if you're progressing in any way, whether it's along a physical journey or however
Mhm.
that is, it's so important that we have the big picture view of that's in front of us, isn't it? Where
It is.
we actually have to. I mean, if you're trying to get to a particular kind of type of environment, and you can only see ahead of you, then like the racehorse, you're stuck going round and round the track. But you
Hmm.
open that up, and you can see all the choices that you have. Then that process of growth, that process of transition becomes so much more powerful.
It really does. And let me ask you, do you find you need to give people permission to be creative again? It's as if we've laid down that gift. We reach a certain age and we feel like we mature and we lay aside the creativity, the curiosity, and we're satisfied with the mundane. And so, do you find when you're working with people that are in burnout that you literally need to give them permission, be creative again?
That's an interesting question. I mean, firstly, when you're talking about we lay creativity aside, I believe it's a little bit more physiological than that, in that the deductive analytical part of our brain is the prefrontal cortex.
Yes.
And of course, that doesn't mature in people. Sometimes they've found until maybe you're 30, but certainly into your 20s. So, and that's the bit that does all this incredibly efficient, picking the template and following the template. So I think there's a physiological element to this maturity as well as the maturity of social norms, following social norms.
Yes.
I think in terms of permission, I don't I don't sort of consciously. I can certainly see where you're going with that. That I don't consciously find I have to do that because I only have to start explaining that the person, my client, actually used to think in a different way when they were young. And suddenly there's a whole string of little aha moments. It's sort of, wow, yes, okay, I can see that. And so it's almost as if some part of their mind is aware that they've lost something valuable. And so, when you're just explaining in very general terms the kind of changes that went on, there's a sort of a magnetic attraction to saying, okay, I want some of that back.
Yes. It's an awakening, as you referred to earlier,
Yeah.
awakening our curiosity, our creativity. And I went to your website and you have up there, my goal is to promote the incredible value in creative thinking. Creative thinking, create new neural pathways to banish burnout, make better decisions, increase emotional intelligence, and be happier. I mean, that's the crux of all that you're doing.
Yes, it is. Absolutely right.
Can you tell us real quick about you have some workshops so people can work with you one on one, but then you also I think you call them banish burnout workshops.
Yes, I actually all my banish burnout programs are really are not group activities, and the reason for that is that I find people are a little bit loath to address their burnout with as a group,
Hmm.
um, because people tend to see it as a weakness.
That's true.
And it, which is a shame. I mean, not all people by any stretch, but there is
Hmm.
that kind of tendency. But one of the least expensive of my programs, which is $175, that's an 8 module program with videos and workbooks and and also the ability to contact me. But that's something that you just work on your own. And
Okay.
that's really designed for people who are just feeling, stressed, or they recognize the necessity to shift their thinking in certain ways. The other two Banish Burnout programs are highly intensive one-on-one coaching with me. And we focus on the 3 R's, which is relationships, recreation, and responsibilities, because those represent the areas where people with burnout almost inevitably have negative changes. So relationships, I mentioned before that, there's a very strong desire for people to kind of, move other people away from their lives in some way, friends, family, spouse, and to try and deal with this problem just on their own. And so that needs to be, these people that could be a source of real help to them.
Yes.
Somehow or other, there's something inside which tends to push them away. Recreation, in terms of especially physical recreation, nearly always that's vanished with people with burnout. Oh, yes, I used to
Mhm.
play tennis. Well, when was the last time you picked up your racket? Well, probably 18 months ago, So all that stuff. Now, just going for a walk, especially within nature, has incredibly positive things attached to it. Even physiological things. We've between the two hemispheres of our brain, we've got this very, very poor data transfer. I mean, it's in the world of broadband, this little piece is really like sort of a piece of string with two cans at the end. I mean, it's called the corpus callosum, and that's the one way that data can transfer across the brain. When you start to do a physical activity like walking that doesn't require any cognitive energy, I mean, it's just, we don't think about, one foot in front of the other. That corpus callosum starts to open up. We get much more better data flow through that from one side to the other. And I believe that's why quite a lot of aha moments come when you're walking the dog, in the fields or
Yes, I
whatever.
agree. I
But
agree.
it also promotes creative thinking. By the way, that the idea that the right hand side of the brain is creative and the left is analytical, that's been totally debunked.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, with fMRI imaging, it's been shown that we use both sides of the brain when we're thinking about anything. Now, not in the same pathways, but whether we're thinking analytically or creatively, the chances are we're using both halves of the brain. So, but it is so important, and this is the basis of my spherical thinking process. It's so important to use both halves of the brain because the brain, both sides do have certain different functions. It doesn't split in the way that it used to be thought, but so just going for a walk, but also recreations that involve meeting other people. I mean, going for a game of tennis or a game of golf, or where you're actually meeting other people. You're solving two problems at the same time, and then the third is responsibilities. And people with burnout frequently So there's something in the mind that's sort of telling them this is all happening because you're not working hard enough. And so, they pile on the coals and it gets worse and worse and worse. And they're doing more and more stuff that they could be delegating. So, it's just it's another very important thing. Taking care of those three pillars goes a long way to allowing the brain to have enough space to think creatively. And I actually happen to be I've been a meditator for 35 years, and I
Mhm.
started meditating when I had burnout. And so, I'm actually a great supporter of the value of meditation. And there's some
Yes.
interesting stuff about neural pathways, creativity, and meditation too, which happen to be
Mhm.
connected. So, these things are all very, very powerful tools to helping people resolve burnout.
That's fabulous. And I know people can find these on your website if they want to find more about your workshops. And I need to ask you a question about emotional intelligence before we close. So, how does creativity help us regulate our emotions instead of suppressing them?
Well, if you think about the notion of creative thinking being divergent, um, that puts a lot of what goes on in your life in a context. In other words, if you're having an argument with somebody or you've got a knee-jerk reaction because somebody has said something negative about you or to you, and you're able just to sort of step back and take a breath before you respond to that, then basically you're being very kind to your emotional responses. You're able to sort of say, okay, well that's his opinion. I don't happen to agree, but as opposed to sort of, what do you think you're saying? You know, so
Hmm.
you've got all these kind of negative processes that redressed can be redressed with um, the kind of little pauses that emotional intelligence can help. So, um, yeah, that's there are many other aspects of commercial emotional intelligence that I won't go into, but um, that kind of process that goes on
Hmm.
as we think creatively and help that emotional intelligence process is very, very valuable.
So I can see where it can help us in times of conflict.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yep, very much so.
Well, Dr. Walton, you have been an incredible guest today. You have shared so much knowledge with us on creativity, and I just really hope and everyone is being inspired to remember who they were. Remember when they were curious, and remember the creativity that was in their lives, and want to bring that back. And so, in closing, is there anything that you would love to share with the audience that maybe we haven't touched on, or is there any encouragement or inspiration you'd love to share?
Oh, I think we've touched on so much. There's not a lot I can add really, except to say that, between increased happiness, increased emotional intelligence, better relationships, better decision making, who would not want to reintroduce creativity into their lives?
Well said. Well, you have certainly inspired me today. And to the Transition Tribe, I just want to say thank you for being here this week. I hope and pray this episode has inspired you to experience the awakening of the creativity that truly is still inside of you. There is a bigger vision than what you're seeing. That obstacle in front of you, there are creative thoughts that could take you around that or over that, especially if you're in times of transition, because difficult decisions need to be made. And so I would do as Dr. Walton encouraged, maybe sit down and try to discover three more possibilities to your situation. And I would say get together with two or three people and maybe collectively you can come up with creative ideas because I know I'm inspired when someone says something and it helps me use that as a platform to think of something deeper and higher. So, until we meet again, keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep the faith, and remember there is purpose, there is power in the transitions that we experience in life.